2. Autumn 1485. Abbey of Bellerac, Béarn. Beatrice. Beatrice stood just outside the gates and watched the shepherds and flocks make their descent down the steep slope into Bellerac's sheltered valley. The discordant rattle of iron bells reverberated in her ears. She squinted against the sun's glare, tracking the movements of a sinewy man who separated from the group and made his way through the orchard to the abbey. "I am Jorge de Luz," he said to her, bowing. "I speak for the shepherds of Ronzal." He had thick black hair and a short beard, and his Pyrenees was flawless. "You are not Aragonese?" "My wife comes from Béarn. She taught me the local tongue." "Ah." Beatrice looked past him at the milling flocks, the heavily laden pack mules, the golden dogs with their spiked collars. Her eyes lingered on the shepherds. In their flax blouses, wool vests, and black felt hats, they looked like prosperous peasants, a far cry from the filthy pagans she had expected. "Welcome," she said. "There's much to discuss. Will you return this evening to the abbey after your work is done? You and all of your men. For supper." He looked startled. "Aye, if that pleases you, abbess." He tipped his hat at her and turned away. A table was set in the warming house next to the gates. When the men filed in, their hair and faces were dripping with water from the stream. The servants spooned a thin gruel into bowls and poured beer into ceramic cups. "The crops here are not what they used to be," apologized Beatrice. "We do not get much meat or fish, either." "There's a bit more time before winter is upon us," Jorge said. "We'd be happy to hunt and fish for you these next few weeks." "I did not realize that shepherds are also hunters." "We do what we must," Jorge said. "All of us are handy with a bow and a knife. We're no strangers to axes either." One of the shepherds, a bony man with a jutting nose and eyes fixed in a dark scowl, began to talk rapidly in Aragonese. "What does he say?" Beatrice waited for a translation. Jorge silenced the man with a fierce look. "We're grateful to you, abbess, for honoring the ancient agreements," he began tactfully. "Our animals can't survive the snows in Ronzal, and we're lucky to have this valley for refuge. The problem is, in winter there is so little fodder for our sheep here that we're forced to butcher them and sell the meat." "You still earn income that way," she pointed out. "A thirst for our wool grows in the north, and merino wool fetches a much higher price than meat. That's hard to take for the men." "The plague very nearly drained all life from this place, and it still suffers," she said. "You've seen how many cold hearths there are in the village. With so few peasants to work the fields, we are limited in what we can grow." Her eyes flicked back to the scowling man. "Does your friend offer any ideas to solve this problem?" "His ideas sound more like insults," said Jorge, smiling wryly. "But I've an idea. In our valley, younger brothers and sisters must leave and find their own way. Why not point them to Bellerac? The empty cottages in this valley could fill up with families again, with the brothers and sisters of these men. Then you'll have strong hands to work the fields and plow and harvest, and we'll have more fodder for the flocks come winter." "But they would lose their freedom. Mountain shepherds are free men, are they not?" Jorge nodded. "There is no lord who rules over us. We're governed by the peace accords, the fueros. The house of Otto can't touch us, nor can any other noble." Beatrice stiffened in her chair. Her mind darted to the copper-haired baby asleep in the nursery. "What about the kings?" she asked. "The kings of Aragon honor the ancient agreements. Everyone honors the agreements, except for the sheep ranchers of Jaca and Saragossa." "What do you mean?" "Come summer, they send their flocks to the high meadows. Sheep pour into our valleys like a flood. They want us out, want all the grass for themselves. We've been willing to share, but their numbers keep swelling. The conflicts grow uglier with each passing year." She barely heard him. The word Otto rumbled through her mind like a thunderhead, drowning out all sensible thoughts. With great effort, she willed her mind away from the girl Miramonde, forcing herself back to the conversation at hand, to the dark-haired men across the table. It is interesting that you say the demand for your wool grows. Meanwhile, the abbey's own flocks bear coarse wool that no merchant worth his salt will buy. I have a proposal of my own for you. We're better served slaughtering the animals we own and replacing them with your merinos. How much does a merino sheep fetch at the livestock market in Hakka? I will pay for the flock in gold. She thought of the sack of coins Elena had brought from Marguerite to Otto. It was still half full. Before Jorge even finished translating her words, the men exploded in high-volume Aragonese, shouting over one another in an effort to be heard. Jorge stood, his arms outstretched, and let out a single ominous "Ah!" Silence fell over the group. The tall, sharp-nosed shepherd, who had spoken up in the beginning, folded his arms over his chest and stuck his chin out at a defiant angle. "The men disagree about that idea," Jorge said. "They've heard that in Castilla, if any man sells sheep outside of the kingdom, his life is forfeit." "This is not Castilla," Beatrice said. "Your sheep have overwintered on these lands for generations. Merinos journey back and forth from Aragon to Bearn each year unharmed, and so do their shepherds. You just finished telling me the peace agreements are honored by the kings. Still, some of the men are uneasy about the idea of selling sheep. Even if we agreed to it, I'd not want to write a note of sale on parchment." Beatrice stared at him, speechless. "Yes, I can write." There was a trace of impatience in his voice. "The Council of Families in each valley keeps records about livestock, grazing agreements, disputes. Those who sit on the council must read and write and work figures." "Do you keep records of the number of fleeces you sell, the prices you're paid for them?" "Of course." "In your record book, then, the merinos that grow fat on my crops will be listed as your possessions, but half of them will be the property of the abbey, and proceeds from the sale of their wool will be split between us, privately. If you agree, your plan to populate our village with the spare brothers and sisters of Ronzal shall be done. What do you say?" Jorge regarded her for a long while. He pointedly refrained from translating her last words, one hand held aloft to ward away the glares and disgruntled sighs of his men. Finally he spoke. "We are in agreement." Beatrice looked around the table in wonder. She'd been expecting a pack of heathens clothed in filthy animal skins. She was wrong on at least one count. The clothes they wore were not what she had expected. And if they were heathens, well, God save them. As long as these men proved valuable to Bellorac, how they worshipped was of no importance. The following day she spent hours in the library poring over the Abbey's record books. Her eyes scanned rows of numbers until she was caught up by an entry that looked nothing like the others. Manuscripts, books, and sundries, sold to Carlo Sacazar, merchant of Ney. She squinted. How many ducats were those items sold for? The numerals were blurred by a stain. She brought the record book to the cellaress, Sister Mathilde, who was counting ceramic jugs of grain by torchlight in the stone cellars. "Sister, what is this?" Beatrice hoisted the book into the shifting circle of light cast by the torch. "Here, this reference to books and sundries and Carlo Sacazar?" Mathilde peered at the text. "Ah, yes, the wool merchant of Ney, always smiling, I remember. He came here with his sister, though she wasn't much for smiling. Looked as though she'd drunk sour milk, to my mind." She turned her head, distracted by a scuttling sound emanating from a dark corner. "The rats are at it again. What happened to that blessed cat?" "Never mind the rats or the cat," Beatrice said. "What do you remember?" "They came here. Oh, it was long ago. The Mother Abbess was near the end, I remember. Begging your pardon, but some of us thought she was not right in the head in her last years." And Mathilde hesitated, clearing her throat. Well, it pains me to say it, She sold most of the books in the library to them, for quite a tidy sum, if I recall. 2 bags of coin they gave her. 2 bags of coin for the contents of our library? And it has all gone to the home of a wool merchant, you say? Beatrice was incredulous. He bought them for his sister, for she's an abbess as well. Built her a fancy convent in Ney is the story. The abbess before you didn't care for books, but I suppose that's obvious, given that she sold them all away. Mathilde lobbed a piece of cork at the shadows. Whatever skulked there fell silent. Ah, that's better, she smiled in satisfaction. Beatrice shut the book and turned away without another word. The next morning she composed a letter to the merchant Carlos Sacazar. She assumed a pleading tone, offering to travel to Ney and meet with him to discuss the return of the volumes to their spiritual home at the Abbey. She carried on at length about the book's importance to the future survival of the Abbey, to its identity, to its moral strength. Her confessor, a bishop in Po, would be much aggrieved to learn of the sale of Bellerac's spiritual property, she added. Of course, she hoped she would not have to take up the matter with him. She knew, no matter what kind of man Carlos Sacazar was, the implication that a bishop might intervene would force him to at least acknowledge her request. In truth, her goal was twofold. Yes, she desired the return of the books, but more than that, she wanted to learn how the wool trade in Ney functioned. Beatrice dipped her quill in ink, thinking of the path that had brought her here to the edge of the wilderness. If her father had his way, she would have been married off at 12 to a squire or a knight for hire like himself. He spent most of her childhood fighting for foreign nobles in distant lands. When she was 7, he sailed away from Béarn on a ship to Castilla. He was gone for 3 years. When he returned, scars puckered the skin on his face, and he walked with a limp. He no longer held his arms out to Beatrice and her 2 sisters so they could run to his embrace. Instead, he obsessed over their futures. Within a few years, both of Beatrice's older sisters were wed, one at 14 and the next at 12. Her mother, blessed woman, had talked him into allowing her to enter the convent of Aldefount in the north of Béarn. Instead of paying a dowry to a husband's family, the silver went to the convent. And when her father died, with no son to carry on the family name, their modest manor house, surrounded by wheat fields, was turned over to a male cousin. Beatrice's mother died an unwelcome guest in her own home. Beatrice, with her calm, practical nature, had proven herself worthy of the religious life. She rose quickly through the ranks of well-born sisters at Aldefount and was elected treasurer, the youngest woman ever to hold the rank, the abbess claimed, because of her intelligence and her immunity to the caprices of others. She had no use for mysticism and was unmoved when other sisters claimed to have heard the voice of God during trances or in their dreams. Beatrice found peace in the long hours of silent prayers, the measured pace of life counted out by the chiming of bells, the arc of the sun, the waxing and waning of the moon. But now that existence was over. Though her family's fortune had run dry, somehow a thread of value had attached itself to her bedraggled name again. It seemed her family was last of a line that traced back to the founders of a convent in the wild Pyrenees called Bellerac, a place that had survived plague and poverty and famine, a place whose charter decreed that the abbess be a descendant of the convent's founding family. Beatrice signed her name on the letter and sat back, waiting for the ink to dry. Twisting the gold ring off her finger, she stared at its face, at the simple sheaf of wheat that was her family herald. She would stamp the wax seal with her ring and send the letter out into the world. But the truly audacious thing was that she would follow it out of those gates, would ride back down the mountain road to Ney with no authority from anyone but herself. Her father would roll in his grave to learn this, she was sure. He had paid good silver for his youngest daughter to live out her days safe behind a wall. And here she was, about to pass through the gates and travel in search of wealth, just as he had. The difference was she wore no armor, nor did she wield a weapon. She was only a nun, after all, a nun who dared to enter the world of men. Fate was not always kind to such women.